Get started, and we are live on the Gamification Revolution. Hello, everybody. It's Gabe Zickerman. I'm here with you on a sunny and beautiful, starting to feel like spring a little bit, yay, New York City day. And I'm joined by Todd Deery from the University of Central Florida. Hi, Todd.
Hey, how are you?
So Todd and I were just talking. He's in Orlando, which is amazing. I was just there a little while ago giving a speech to some payments people. And speaking of speeches, as many of you know, June 10th through the 13th in San Francisco is GSummit. It's the conference that I founded and am the chair of. We've got tons of amazing people coming to speak. You know, Neil deGrasse Tyson giving a keynote on how to engage people in really difficult discussion. Of course, Professor Tyson, the host of Cosmos, and many of you know him. He's sort of an idol of the science set and definitely one of mine. I'm really excited to hear him. And if you don't already know this, you're going to have a chance to win some more intimate time with Dr. Tyson as part of a meet and greet event after his keynote. So be sure to get your tickets for GSummit early. The code is GAMREV, GAMREV, if you're a watcher of the show, and you can get those tickets at gsummit.com. And also, of course, keynoting this year, Professor BJ Fogg from Stanford's Behavior Lab talking about how to create habits in people. Oh my God, it's amazing. We've got Robert Tursek talking about the Internet of Things and how to create engagement with the Internet of Things and lotteries. Oh, crazy. And me and Todd Deery will also be there talking about some cool stuff that they've been working on. Before we get into today's session, I just want to remind you that if you want to chat with us, you're going to have to log into the Spreecast platform using one of your social media accounts. Any one of them will do. And once you've logged in, you can chat with all the amazing people who are here with us every session. Our regular Seamus, Dutch, David, Mike, hello, everybody. And also, you can ask us questions by clicking that question button or clicking that camera button, and you can even come on and you can ask Todd my questions. I promise you this 30 minutes is going to go fast, so be sure to log in now so you can connect with all of us. Okay, so Todd, tell us a little bit about the program at the University of Central Florida and how you come to this gamification discussion today.
Well, sure, yeah. So I'm a part of a graduate program here at UCF called the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy. We're a graduate game development program. So we offer a 16-month master's degree. So we're bringing in students on an art track, a programming track, and a production track. And we're putting them together on meaningful project-based learning. So our program is very industry-based, very group-based, it's very project-based. And so, in sort of education ease, it's applied learning. It's really learning by doing. And so students, we've graduated 359 students since 2005. They're working at 124 different companies around the world, everywhere from Electronic Arts and Microsoft, Sony, Ubisoft, Telltale, Blizzard, Bungie, all over the place. So, we're a handful of grad programs in the country that are doing game development kind of holistically, I guess.
So so tell us a little bit about, I mean, that's all awesome, right? And teaching more people, game development, I think is very helpful and certainly going to be profoundly impactful. There's this project called Scrum Hero that you originally kind of brought to our attention. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What's Scrum Hero about?
Yeah, so Scrum Hero was the brainchild of a student of ours and now an alumni named Derek Barra. And in fall of 2012, he was managing a small team of student developers at FIEA. They were creating a game called Save the Dodos, which was a fun kind of platformer game. And essentially, Derek had the idea of, could you sort of gamify the game development process, or could you gamify Scrum, really, and sort of what would that look like? And so he started sort of experimenting with different things. He was taking elements of Scrum, which include, obviously, probably most people are familiar with, but, which have built-in milestones. And particularly the characteristic of it that you have very short daily meetings, right? And then he also had a visual board. We have rooms in our building that are war rooms, essentially. They're creative rooms for our teams to use. They had access to one of those rooms, and we built those rooms very specifically. And one of the features of them is you have an entire wall that you can tack stuff up on. It's basically like a cork board almost looking wall. And so he built on that wall a very visual Scrum board or Kanban board. And from there, he kind of built a game layer on top of Scrum and began to work on it. I started talking to him about it, and that was kind of version 1, and there's certainly some, I can get into more detail on that, but essentially that was how the idea was born. From there, we ended up taking it and building kind of a second version of it, and then we ended up testing it on a few groups of students to sort of try to determine how effective it was. And so we even had a test with a control group and stuff like that. The data ended up being kind of fairly dirty, but for a couple of reasons. But yeah, it was interesting. So we called it Scrum Hero. It has nothing to do with guitars or being in a band or anything like that, even though the name sort of suggests that. It was really one of those great things that the name was a placeholder name at first, and we always thought we'd come up with a better name. And then it just got far enough along where we never did. So,
Okay, so Scrum, so just, we shouldn't make the assumption that everybody knows exactly what it is. So Scrum is part of agile development methodology. It has elements in it like a daily stand-up meeting, which you mentioned, Todd, and you talked about how you would approach this. Can you tell us, one of the things that's observed, and other people have observed it, agile development methodology, and Scrum in particular, already feels a little game-like. Like it's got some natural elements that could be turned into games. I'm curious from your perspective, since it came from one of your students, can you speak a little bit to like how his idea actually came about? And of course, I think we want to know a little bit more about what it is, but that connection between this sort of millennial generation and their game view and why they turn things into games sort of naturally. I'm curious, as an educator, what your thoughts are on that.
well, I mean, I do think you're right. Obviously, there's lots of research out there about millennials and then the generations that are following those, and the multiple screens. And I certainly think that's one of the things working in favor of the sort of stickiness of gamification, is that you've got some generations that are coming up that have been playing games. I mean, I go and talk to, and I'm in charge of the recruiting for the program, so I go out and talk to a lot of 20-year-olds. All the time. I'm doing it later on today. I did it last night. And I always tell, one of the stats that really surprises people is the average age of a gamer, right? So if you ask somebody older than me, my parents, for example, and you told them, what is the average age of a gamer? What number would they give you? Probably something like 12 or 11 or 14. And of course, that number is 36 according to last year. And so you've had a few generations now of people that have grown up playing games, where games aren't some ancillary thing. They are a major part of their entertainment mix, in the same way that books and music might have been for us, or movies, or whatever. And of course, they also enjoy all those other things as well. I was in sort of one of the first generations. I had a Pong hooked up to my TV set. I had Super Pinball, which was just the one game, with the hardware. So
I guess my question is more like, why did it come from the student and not from you guys? Like, you and the teachers at the program are responsible for teaching the methodologies of the development process of video games. And interesting to me, not a criticism of you, but it's interesting that this idea came from the students. Can you talk a little bit about how they view that?
Well, I mean, there is an interesting question of what are one of the things I want to cover when I talk about this is the advantages and disadvantages of trying to gamify a game developer, right, or student game developers in this case. I think part of it was that as student game developers, there is no objection to games, right? I think when you talk to clients who want to gamify something, one of the things they're worried about is, are people going to accept this? Are games just sort of frivolous, useless? Well, for our students, there is none of that. They believe in games. They're bought into the ability of games to influence people. If they weren't, they wouldn't be here working on their projects and trying to have a career out of it. So I think it's primarily probably that, if I had to speak for Derek, that he thought it would work. He was the development director on his team, so he was in kind of a role where you're overseeing really the efficiency of the entire project. His job is really to make sure that the game is being developed on time. So he was thinking about those things. How do I he's thinking about what a lot of people who are in the gamification space are thinking about. How do I make the team run better? How do I achieve my goals better? And for him, it was an easy switch to think about using game mechanics. It's what he deals with every day and what he talks about every day.
Do you, so can you talk a little bit more specifically about Scrum here? So what was tacked up on the board? How does the game actually work? And what were some of the results that you found from the process?
Yeah, so in version 1, what was really being tested more than anything was, one of the important things that Scrum does for you is it tries to narrow down people estimating their task accurately. Like a programmer is going to have a task. They're going to work on this particular technical problem, or an artist has a model that they're going to work on. And one of the important things for when you're developing a game is knowing how long each individual person's tasks are going to take. So estimation accuracy was really the thing that version 1 of Scrum Hero was working on. So for example, everybody on the board was a list of quests or tasks. And on those tasks, the developer that was working on it would estimate how much time they thought that task was going to take. Okay, so I have task X. I think it's going to take 5 hours. Okay. The currency of the game was essentially tickets or gold, but they were really just tickets. And the person would be rewarded if they estimated their task and finished it under the amount of the estimates. If I estimated 5 hours, if I finished under there, I would be rewarded. At the same time, all the rest of the players could bet on that task if they wanted and how accurate they thought that task estimation was. If the person didn't complete that task in the amount of time, then that was a lose condition. The person lost, and so did the people betting on it. Now, the amount of money you could bet on each individual task was based on how complex the task was. So simpler tasks allowed for only smaller bets. More complex tasks, longer tasks, allowed for larger bets. And so really it became a game that tried to refine the task estimation process.
Through this sort of betting mechanism. Now, did you have any concerns about this betting mechanism? We have some questions also from folks that I want to get to, but did you have any concerns about this betting mechanism? And ultimately, what does that betting mechanism actually accomplish in this?
Well, I mean, I think it probably accomplished a couple of things. One, I should say this was a pretty tight team, so I wasn't too worried about. These were students who'd already worked for a year together on different projects. They knew each other really well. They had sort of self-selected into this team, so the vast majority of them, I think, I wasn't worried. If your question is leading to, did you worry about them causing rifts or anything like that? And I wasn't so much worried about that, and I don't think the team was as well. What it really did is it, of course, immediately started identifying who was good at estimating tasks, and it made people much more cognizant of their time estimate. So rather than just sort of sloppily throwing down a time estimate, when you know that the light may be shining on you and that people may be betting their currency on you and they have an investment in that estimation being accurate, it caused people to be more thoughtful on their time estimates. I should tell you, it did one other thing when we discuss game development here, and there's professors here that know a lot more about this than I do. But you talk about emergent gameplay, which is the idea of, as you well know, Gabe, that when people start playing your game in a way that is unexpected, that you did not anticipate. Well, so if you think about the mechanic of, I have a task, I'm going to estimate that task, and I get rewarded if I finish under it. Well, one way of griefing that task very, very easily is to overestimate dramatically the amount of time it's going to take. So I'm going to take a task that I know is 5 hours, and I'm going to say it's going to take me 10 hours because I know that way I'm safe in making it under. And sure enough, a couple of students, because they were so astute at how to grief games and sort of the rules and how to work within rule sets, ended up doing that. So Derek and the team had to change the game mechanic down to within a window, a plus or minus window around the bet, and you had to finish within that range.
Right. So that's a great example, right, of that emerging
Yeah.
play. Mike, one of our regular viewers, was actually wondering: was the game optional? Was it something that the team could choose to play, or once the game was set, did it become required? And how has that evolved over time as you guys have continued to test it and play around with it?
The game wasn't really optional for the team. I mean, the game was kind of developed with the team of devs. I think there was 8 or 9 on that team, and so I think I think everybody participated. Had somebody not really want to, they certainly would have been welcome to not participate. But I think the entire team, participated in that first version. The other I should tell you that one of the interesting rewards sort of systems built into the version 1 of Scrum Hero was, I told you they were building this game called Save the Dodos, and there was different character sketches for the dodos themselves for the birds, and they had on the wall they had 4 or 5 different versions of these birds, and when you won, if you won the round of the game, by winning the most tickets, you would be able to place some of your gold on the dodo that you wanted into the game. And so that was part of the reward system, and the motivation was because everybody had kind of a different favorite of the birds that they want. So I would come in on sort of a daily or semi-daily basis and look up and say, okay, who's winning right now? And so that was an
That's
interesting,
awesome.
I thought, reward. Yeah.
So that is very interesting. So that's tying performance there to actually, like, maybe things that people want to kind of actually see manifest in the real world in a way, right? Which is very
Well,
interesting. So is a sort
yeah,
of question. So sort of. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, and that reward is very tied in, of course, to the development itself, right? It wasn't like it was a unrelated extrinsic reward. It was very much related to the product
Right.
they were developing, hey. And so I think that was one of the strengths of that particular, reward system.
So one of the sort of questions or comments that Seamus, another one of our regular viewers, thinks Seamus posted sort of earlier is, he's talking about the pushback in education on gamification. And I want to sort of ask you this question. Now, obviously, you guys are a game development school. That's what you do. And there's lots of kind of meta learning here as students are not only developing the kinds of games that they may eventually work on, but also gamifying their learning process. I'm sure many of you are really into it. Can you talk at all to maybe some of the pushback to that, or some of your views about how we might bring this kind of thinking and these sorts of ideas into, let's say, non-game design education?
Well, yeah, there is. I think you're seeing some excellent examples in education. I think, to me, well, let me back up. I think education is one of the big areas that gamification can really make a difference. James Paul Gee, who's a researcher, has done some research based, where he's talking about some articles about the comparison between education and games, and there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of things that games can provide education that I think are really, really needed. For example, persistent, constant feedback. Um, I think it's kind of silly that we're still in an era where students take a test and then they have to wait days and sometimes even
Right.
weeks before feedback on how they do on that test. So, gamifying some of these processes where students are getting more consistent feedback, meaningful context and goals, all those things that games can provide are useful in education. I think there's pushback. I think the pushback is partially generational. And it goes back to, I think, what we were talking about earlier, Gabe, that is, there are certainly teachers who do not think that games can be anything but entertainment, and that by putting them in an educational setting, you're going to water down the curriculum. You're going to cheapen the teaching experience. I think that generational push also is partially a fear of technology and of teaching in a different way, that maybe where the efficacy of that way hasn't been fully vetted, or there's still questions about it. I would say those are probably two of the main reasons. Education is risk averse in general, almost all levels of it. That's one thing I love about working at UCF. UCF's a young school. We just celebrated our 50th year. We're the second largest school in the country behind Arizona State, and we're willing to take some risk, and I think that's working out well for us. But
Well,
you have
so
seen some successful examples. Are you familiar with, like, World of Classcraft that's being
of
done?
course, yeah, and
Yeah,
we've
you know.
we've had a number of those folks. Like we've actually had those folks here on the show before. There are definitely lots of examples. I guess one of the questions that I would ask you, and not to be, kind of push your buttons on this, Todd, but how much gamification is there in the game design program at UCF.
But
Understanding that you're more advanced than most places, beyond what you've done with Scrum Hero, what else is happening there?
well, yeah, and there's a second version of Scrum Hero that I can talk to you about as well, where we kind of did the experiment on, but I'll be covering that hopefully in San Fran as well. There is some other, there are some other ways that we sort of have gamified the curriculum here. Not a lot of it. Um, I mean, in some ways, you could say that making the curriculum is so project and group based. I mean, our students make 5 or 6 games for their first semester here. They work on their master's thesis is not a paper where you're sort of passively, reciting information. It's making a game. So they're on teams of 10 or 15. They have weekly milestones that they have to give and updates. So a lot of the features of gamification we have sort of incorporated in. Rick Hall, one of our production professors, I always think does a really cool assignment where he does a game design. So he does a game design assignment with his class where his class has to create a game design document. At the same time, so all the producers, this is all the producers in his class, they create a game design, okay? And they each turn it in without their name on it. He also does a game design document, and he does it anonymously as well. Then he sends those documents off to a couple of professional game developer friends of his. He gets 4 or 5, and then they rank them all.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, and so they have this competition, and every year there's this, and he doesn't know the results as well, and so he actually unveils, sort of the results as well. And so that is really interesting because the students find it amazing to be able to go up against Rick, who has a long game career, and to see whether they can beat him. And there's a kind of leaderboard thing and a status thing that happens there. So, I mean, those are just a couple of small examples, but we haven't done a lot of overt gamifying. I know there's a few faculty that are interested in doing more and more of it.
Well, it sounds like, one of the other questions that emerges naturally out of that is, what about teaching gamification itself? So, in the way that we've arrived at Scrum Hero as a method of gamifying a business process inside an entity, which of course the students involved were just looking to solve a problem, but ultimately it is potentially a standalone product that people could use to do that. And I know from my own work, lots of people ask about gamification of Agile. We worked on some projects as well. So what about making that an actual class or making that an actual part of the program? Like, hey, let's turn our lenses on the challenges of the business process inside the school.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I mean, one thing is that Derek Vera, who was the student that I started working with, I know he's working on a digital version of Scrum Hero now that will allow you to input tasks very easily, estimate tasks, creates kind of a visual Scrum board for you, on the app itself. Derek's come back, and we've gone and talked to we bring in a new class every August, what we call a new cohort, and so he comes in and talks to them about the work that he did with Scrum Hero and about the development director role. And so, I think if some of the teams want to take that up and use Scrum Hero or some kind of version of it, and it's flexible enough that it's flexible enough that you can modify the game to suit your own team, that they can do that. So I think we have been doing some of that. We haven't formally adopted any of that as part of the curriculum. Now, we have had some projects in the past that have been gamification projects where an outside company has come in and said, "Hey, we're interested in solving this particular problem," and we've done that. A couple that you might be interested in. We had a couple of students. Not my third year, but the third year that the program was up and running. Lockheed Martin, which, as you know, has a big headquarters down here, the military sim company. They put a couple of their employees through our program. They wanted them to get master's degrees, and they wanted them to improve their game development skills. And so they came in, but what they were looking for was to create a simulation on how to train people how to put out fires on Navy battleships.
Ah, okay.
And so, yeah, so there was a group of students of about eight students that developed a game called Danger Zone, and it was literally a networked multiplayer game with I think you could do 4 people at a time, and you had to equip yourself with you would go and investigate a fire, and depending on what it was, electrical fire or a particular kind of fire, then you would have to go find the right kind of extinguishers and those kind of things to put out the fire. And of course, you had to do things in a certain order, and when we first learned of the way that they were training for that before, I was amazed at how rudimentary it was. I mean, it it was very unengaging and very uninteresting. And when they developed the game, even though I think the game had some, the simulation, it had some issues with it as well, but it was light years ahead. And they reported that, of course, a lot more people took the training, a lot more people remembered the training and the methods to put out the fires, and the students got to go and take reference, shots on Navy battleships and cool things like that.
It's one of the interesting kind of dynamics is, there's obviously been a serious games thing that's gone on for some time. And then, over the
Right.
last few years with the advent of gamification, a sort of increase in the discussion around that. I wonder from your perspective, I know that you can't speak to all of the game schools in the country, but from your perspective, is there a way to connect what it is that you guys are doing and teaching kind of core game design and development skills that are sound like they're oriented around the kind of traditional game industry of both video and computer games, and adapt that for this gamification opportunity? How do you train people who maybe go to work at Lockheed Martin and not at Electronic Arts? What's different about that?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges is that most of our students that come in, they all want to work at Blizzard or Electronic Arts or Sony. I mean, that just is the
Sure.
way it is. They're all hardcore gamers. But that being said, a lot of them, not a lot of them, but certainly, let's say 20 or 25% of them don't go work for a game company. They do go to Lockheed Martin or American Systems, or they go to Google, or they go to YouTube, or they go to, an advertising agency. I just got an email from a student today. She works at USAA, the insurance company, that works with the military a lot, and she's looking to do things in there. Um, I think we constantly at FIEA, and I'm sure the other schools, well, I'm assuming that the other grad programs like us do, try to open the students' eyes to all the opportunities that are out there. That, hey, there not only there are gaming opportunities in other industries, but there's other companies out there that could use your skill set. Most of the students are surprised to learn how good the careers are, in modeling and simulation, medical simulation. We're getting a lot of calls from the medical industry looking for ways to gamify their training, surgeon and doctor training, patient consent. There's a lot of growth in areas like patient consent. The old thing where you are about to have surgery and you get a whole sheet of forms and you got to go through and check them off. Nobody remembers that. It doesn't, lessen nervousness about a procedure. So part of it's just education, letting them know it's out there. And then I think part of it's bringing in occasionally these projects, like I mentioned. 2 years ago, we did an energy game with a local energy provider here. And that game was, I thought, a really good example of gamifying. They wanted to teach about the trade-offs of energy, different types of energy. And so the game was kind of like a Sims game where you had to build a city and you had to provide enough energy for it. And so you had solar that you could pick, you had nuclear, you had this whole mix, you had coal, but all of them had trade-offs, right? Just like a good game. So if you put too much solar, when you put too much solar down, when it became nighttime, you ran out of energy, right? If you put too much, if you had nuclear down, you had to have a buffer zone for where you could put the rest of the buildings and the people. Coal there was a pollution factor that was tracked, and so coal was high on that. So it was really nice teaching about how they're, sort of a mix of energy was what you were going for.
So, just in our last couple of minutes, I'm really curious from your perspective, if you project forward, so we're looking forward, 5 to 10 years at the landscape of opportunities for game design and development students. So these are the folks coming through your program, they're learning things, they're being exposed to stuff. What do you see kind of that looks like for them? Where are they at? And in particular, obviously, I'm interested, in understanding your thoughts about the application to industry, but also beyond entertainment, but also, what you think the kind of challenges are that they're going to have to face and the new things they're going to have to be able to do, other than maybe develop for Oculus.
Yeah, well, dealing with new technology and new platforms is certainly a huge challenge for our students. It's something we're constantly dealing with. We adjust our curriculum very quickly to move with all the new things that are out there. We have a lot more students that are coming into our program that they don't want to go work for another company. What they want to do is start their own. And of course, the sort of startup costs for your own game development company has come way down with mobile and social games and the rise of those. And so meeting those kind of challenges of knowing when you have a product that's ready for market. I think, again, Gabe, going back to your point of letting students know that there's these other markets that companies are looking for. Companies are looking for people that know how to. Well, let me back up. I think part of the problem that gamification has had is that it's not fully using all of the characteristics of a good game, and sometimes people that are doing the gamification aren't maybe enough true game designer to get that through. Our students, when they go out, they should realize there's an opportunity to really add some value to the gamification space for different industries by designing great games first that then also meet the goals of whatever it is that company is looking to do.
That's very interesting and somewhat a controversial view of the world, because many of the gamification discussions that we've had have been about how not to make things too much like a game. And I think one of the interesting things that you're pointing out is, in some cases, maybe things which are more like a game are more apropos. I think a cool thing for you guys to teach would be how to be able to set the bar right in that, which I think is definitely a missing element of the discussion.
Well, and I think part of that is, one of the real takeaways from Scrum Hero was, and so we did a second version of Scrum Hero that we tested, and one of the real things that came out of it was, you've got to know what kind of games your audience has played, what kind of players they are, how interested in games they are in general, before you start gamifying anything, in my opinion. And so once you learn that, and so, for example, one of the teams did a Poke Scrum, what they called Poke Scrum, and it was a Pokemon themed Scrum, and that's because that entire team loved Pokemon, right? That's like the generation that they were. That's what they were into, and so it was highly successful in all of our survey results and data results. Particularly when you're talking about building a culture, wanting to come to the meetings, all these sort of motivational stuff, it was off the charts successful. And so I think part of the problem that we see sometimes in gamification is that the companies never consider, what kind of game will resonate, or what kind of game elements will resonate with our audience. And if they did that work kind of up front, then I think they would also know how much game, so to speak, can this audience take. Do they need just more badges and leaderboards, or do they need more of the complete kind of game experience to achieve our goals? Just to give you one quick example, I told you beforehand I'm a cyclist, and if you're familiar with Strava is a online sort of social network of cyclists, but beyond that, it has a definite game element to it, which is that you hook your bike computer up on your bike, and it of course keeps track of how far you've gone and how fast you've gone on certain routes. Then you can go and upload that stuff onto Strava, and you can see people from all over the world and all over your area that have ridden that same route and how fast they've done it. And that's basically what it offers. And I've always wondered you can follow people and things like that. And I thought, well, that's actually perfect, because if you know anything about cyclists, the main takeaway is how crazy type A competitive they are. So all you've got to do is create kind of a leaderboard situation, expand that out. And I've been on rides where people have taken off and gone crazy fast, and I'm wondering why. And I learned later it's because they're trying to beat some time from somebody else on Strava. So that's an app that knows their audience.
I think it's really interesting, and I guess from my perspective, given how interesting Scrum Hero is, I'd love to see what you at FIEA are able to do to bring more of that kind of a great game design thinking to other areas, and hopefully we'll see more and more of that over time. And if folks want to follow you guys, Todd and the FIEA team are FIEA on Twitter, which is a great place to follow you, I'm sure. And you can also come check out Todd and me and 50 plus other speakers at GSummit. It's June 10th through the 13th. We're so excited to be so excited to have you and excited to meet you in person, Todd, there. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you and talking more about Scrum Hero in San Fran.
It's going to be so much fun. And thanks all of you for joining us on the Gamification Revolution. We'll actually be back tomorrow. How much fun is this? Twice a week. We'll be back tomorrow with another session, and this time it's one-on-one Q&A with me. Until then, everybody, have a great time. Keep having fun. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Take care.